with anyone who dared to challenge him. Still, as she stared at her screen, the image of Jeremy lingered in her mind, calm, composed, and unshaken by David's condescension. There was something about him that didn't fit the mold David had so carelessly shoved him into. Lydia knew better than most how appearances could deceive. She'd seen it before, clients who walked in quietly, dressed modestly, only to reveal they were sitting on fortunes. But David wouldn't hear it. He thrived on assumptions, on stereotypes that made his job easier, or so he thought. What he failed to realize was that those same shortcuts were costing them opportunities. Opportunities like Jeremy, perhaps. Lydia let out a slow breath, trying to steady herself. For now, she typed up the notes from their earlier meeting, making sure everything was documented. If Jeremy did come back, and something told her he would, she wanted to be prepared. Prepared for David's disbelief, prepared for whatever storm Jeremy might bring with him. Because one thing was certain, Jeremy wasn't walking away without leaving an impression. As the hours ticked by, Lydia found herself replaying every moment of their interaction. The way Jeremy had held David's gaze, unwavering, even when David's smugness threatened to take over. The subtle shift in David's demeanor when Jeremy pressed him, not anger, but uncertainty. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but Lydia caught it. And it gave her hope. By the end of the day, the office had emptied out, leaving Lydia alone with her thoughts. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, David would see what happened when you underestimated someone. And Lydia? She'd be ready to watch it unfold. This paraphrase adds depth to the character's emotions and motivations while maintaining the original storyline. It highlights the tension between Lydia's growing unease with David's behavior and her quiet determination to stay professional. At the same time, it emphasizes Jeremy's calculated composure and hints at the power dynamics at play. The tension between them was palpable, a silent storm brewing even as Jeremy had already left the office. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, something in her gut told her so. Her eyes flicked to the clock on her screen, each second ticking by like a heartbeat under the weight of unspoken words pressing down on her chest. The next morning, Jeremy sat at his desk, the sprawling city skyline stretched out before him like an endless canvas of possibility. The events of the previous day replayed in vivid detail, David's arrogance, his smug confidence, and the cutting insult that had shattered all pretense. Jeremy knew what needed to happen next. Every step had been meticulously planned because today wasn't just about setting things right, it was about making a statement. Not only to David Harper but to everyone who had stood silently complicit in their polished indifference. Discrimination would not be tolerated, not here, not ever. And he intended to make that crystal clear. He glanced at his watch. It was time. Jeremy rose from his chair, adjusting the cuff of his impeccably tailored suit, a sharp contrast to the casual attire he'd worn days before. Today, he wasn't just another prospective buyer or face in the crowd. Today, he was the owner. As he stepped into the waiting car, his mind was calm, focused. There was no room for anger now, what fueled him was resolve. David Harper had crossed a line, and Jeremy was ready to show him, and everyone else, what happened when someone underestimated another based solely on appearances. The car pulled up outside the real estate branch, and Jeremy allowed himself a moment to savor the irony. Yesterday, he'd walked into this very building, dismissed and belittled. Today, he returned as the man holding the reins of fate for everyone inside. He stepped out of the car, the crisp click of his shoes echoing against the pavement in the quiet morning air. As he entered the office, the glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, drawing immediate attention. Heads turned. The sleek marble floors and modern decor, once symbols of prestige, now felt cold, reminders of the unchecked professionalism that had let people like David thrive. Lydia was at her desk, fingers dancing across the keyboard until she saw Jeremy. Her hands froze mid-motion, hovering uncertainly above the keys. Something about him was different today, his presence commanded respect, exuding authority she could feel without question. "Good morning, Lydia," Jeremy said, his voice calm yet firm. "Gee, good morning, Mr. Williams," she stammered, nerves coloring her tone. She didn't need to guess why he was here. This wasn't routine. Whatever was happening was bigger than the usual office drama. "Is David in?" Jeremy asked, his tone smooth but unyielding. Lydia nodded, casting a quick glance toward David's office. "Yes, he's in. Do you want me to?" "I'll take care of it," Jeremy interrupted gently but decisively. Without waiting for a response, he strode toward David's office. Lydia watched him go, her hand frozen on the mouse, dread pooling in her chest. Something big was coming, though she wasn't sure who it would break more. Jeremy knocked once, firmly, and pushed open the door without waiting for a reply. David sat behind his desk, head buried in paperwork, oblivious to the intruder. "David," Jeremy said, his voice steady as steel. David looked up, brow furrowing as recognition dawned. But this wasn't the same dismissive gaze from the day before. This time, something flickered in his expression, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. "Mr. Williams," David said, standing awkwardly, his confusion evident. "What are you doing here?" Jeremy stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with deliberate precision. He took in the scene. The neatly organized desk, the framed certificates adorning the walls, trophies of success that suddenly seemed hollow. Symbols of power rendered meaningless in the face of what was about to unfold. "You seem surprised," Jeremy remarked, raising an eyebrow. David forced a nervous laugh, his composure wavering. "Well, I didn't expect. I mean, I didn't know you were," his voice trailed off, stumbling over itself like a car losing traction. "You didn't expect me to be your boss," Jeremy finished flatly, filling in the blanks with surgical precision. David felt the weight of reality crash over him like a tidal wave. His eyes widened imperceptibly, the confident mask he wore beginning to crack at its edges. "Wait, you're the owner?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, David," Jeremy replied, his tone as cold and sharp as steel. "I own this company. And I've been watching you closely." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a storm cloud before continuing. "Yesterday, you had an opportunity to treat me like any other client who walks through that door. But instead, you chose assumption over respect." David's face drained of color, his lips parting but no sound emerging. "Mr. Williams, I didn't mean." Jeremy raised a hand, cutting him off with precision. "You don't need to explain. Your actions spoke volumes." The room seemed to shrink around them, the tension thick enough to choke on. David glanced toward the door, fleeting thoughts of escape flickering in his mind, but there was nowhere to run. Jeremy's presence loomed large, undeniable, commanding control. "You see, David," Jeremy continued, his voice calm yet edged with authority that sliced through the silence, "I built this company on one fundamental belief: everyone deserves respect, regardless of who they are or what they look like. You've shown me today that you don't share that vision." David's hands trembled slightly as he pressed them against the desk, leaning forward in desperation. "Mr. Williams, please. I didn't realize." "No, you didn't realize," Jeremy interrupted, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Because you never stopped to ask. You never considered that someone like me could be your client, your equal, or your boss." David opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was ensnared in the consequences of his own arrogance, caught in a web of assumptions he couldn't untangle. There was no way out now. "This company doesn't need people like you, David," Jeremy said, his tone final, resolute. "As of today, your employment is terminated." David's eyes widened further, shock rippling across his features. "Wait, what?" You're firing me? Yes, Jeremy confirmed, his voice firm, unwavering. Your behavior goes against everything this company stands for. I can't have someone representing me who treats others the way you treated me. David scrambled for words, desperate to salvage the situation, but none came. He knew it was over. His assumptions had sealed his fate, and now he was paying the price. Jeremy turned to leave, pausing only briefly at the door to glance back at David one last time. Let this be a lesson, David. You never know who's walking through that door. It's unfortunate you had to learn it this way. With that, he stepped out, leaving David standing behind his desk, shell-shocked and speechless. As Jeremy re-entered the office, Lydia looked up from her workstation, her expression a mixture of understanding and quiet admiration. She didn't need to ask what had transpired, it was written all over Jeremy's demeanor, the quiet strength, the closed door behind which David remained. Jeremy gave her a brief nod as he passed. I'll address the staff soon. Lydia offered a small, grateful nod in return. For too long, she'd stayed silent while witnessing injustices unfold. But now, seeing Jeremy take decisive action, she felt a spark of hope. Change was coming. Jeremy walked out of the office once more, the glass doors sliding open effortlessly. This time, however, he left with a sense of satisfaction. David Harper had underestimated him, but the message was crystal clear: respect wasn't optional, and assumptions carried consequences. Throughout the day, Jeremy meticulously prepared for the staff meeting. After confronting David, there was no turning back. This wasn't just about dismissing one problematic individual, it was about setting a new standard. Every employee needed to understand what had happened, why it mattered, and what would no longer be tolerated moving forward. Jeremy wasn't merely removing a bad actor, he was reshaping the culture of the company. Today marked not just an end, but also a beginning, a commitment to principles that would define their future.